Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Education and Economic Growth. Today, we don't have any guests with us, so it'll just be kind of a work plan meeting. Could I get someone to move to adopt the agenda? Please. Did I leave my notes over there with you, Sean? Did I drop something? The chair, oh, just hidden, sorry. Okay. So moved by Lynn. And so the first thing on our agenda is the school reopening topic. And so we had sent out letters to different groups representing education, and we've heard a couple of things back. So basically what we want to decide today is if our commitment or priority is to continue with school reopening, and then the next section would be to go through and identify some more priorities you might have. We had some guests that were either canceled or were in the midst of being scheduled when the pandemic hit. And, oh, I skipped right over. Welcome, Sydney, today, our special guest, in place of Minister Hudson. So we were talking about, we have invited PEI Home and School, PEI Teachers Federation, CUPE PEI, and the various advisory councils. And so we will have some presentations from CUPE PEI and the Bluefield and Charlottetown advisory councils. And CUPE is planning to present on the 22nd, next Tuesday, and Bluefield either next Tuesday or the following. PEI Home and School has been in repeated contact with us, but are uncertain on their level of participation at this point. So I guess considering, as we consider this is now the second weekend of school, and wondering how we feel about this, we'll schedule people as they come. Any thoughts on that? I have something I'll say about it if nobody has any. Yes.
I guess, yeah, I welcome any of the groups to come in and talk on the topic, particularly around education and return to school. But I'd like to see some focus on the economy and, and where we're going with that. I don't know if you want to wait until number 4 where we talk about other committee topics, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
Why don't we wait until we get there, because I couldn't agree with you more, James, about that. So what I was thinking about the school reopening topic, it is going to be important to hear from them, and I know I have quite a lengthy list of, I'm calling them kinks, in the startup to be worked out. So I was going to suggest or see what way the committee would like to move forward with these. I don't know if you've been hearing from constituents. These are just kind of little things that are important. And I don't want them to take up all of our committee time. However, I'm wondering if you've been hearing from constituents, if we want to perhaps invite, I don't know if we want to invite the minister in, or if we want to write a letter with some of the questions that we have to get those addressed. Because some of them, I mean, for example, have to do with water filling stations. And I've been hearing one story in particular that's very disturbing about children filling their water bottles from a washroom sink that was far from clean, but a child doesn't necessarily recognize that certain things might be on a tap that aren't healthy. And so it's little things like that are important, and I don't know if we need to hash them out in committee or if we want to send a letter. Does anyone have any thoughts?
Chair?
Sydney?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
And then James.
So I might need to hear more. That seems to me like a very local issue that a principal should be dealing with. But is it a bigger thing? Like, is it like that's their plan, is they have to do it from sinks? Is that why we bring it to the minister?
Well, that's just one example of a lengthy, I have had a lot of different teachers and different people who work in the schools reaching out. I think that while it's school specific, it points to a bigger problem. It's not just one school that I've heard about water filling stations. So I think that, I mean, I don't know whose responsibility is it to kind of work out some of these kinks. Sydney?
So, thank you. So I guess what is the bigger question? Like, is it a protocol is it the school that has set up their COVID plan that says that cohort has to get their water from a sink? Is that what's going on? Or is it just, like, what is the bigger question then?
Well, the bigger question, I mean, kids need water, right, obviously.
Yes.
And so some schools are very well set up with, they've got beautiful water filling stations at the place of every fountain. But some schools don't have that, and so they're not allowed to use fountains. And so.
Okay, so there's what I'm trying to get. I didn't
Yeah,
realize that.
and so for different reasons, I'm not sure, I guess the fountains are closed because of you would want to, as a kid, you're gonna run over and put your mouth on the fountain, you're not gonna think about the possible, but it's those kind of things that are in the operational plan, and it is up to individual schools. However, when you look at the bigger picture, some of these schools aren't as well equipped with some of the things they need, and so people have been asking for portable water refilling stations. For some reason, they're saying no, they can't get those. I'm not sure who they're asking, but they've been told no. And so I think that, and some of them in particular have to do with, I heard some schools, and I have been in touch with the minister about this, he wanted to know which schools, but it points to a bigger problem of space issues. So a few different counselors and school personnel have reached out and said, I don't know where the student wellbeing teams are going to go, there's just no space in the school. And so a suggestion that I had for the minister was, you may want to check in with student wellbeing teams in a month or so and see how they're doing with that, or is there space issues? And then on a school by school basis, schools may need support to figure out where they are going to allow for those services to happen. So it's kind of all those, I'm calling them kinks, they're not anything that can't be worked out. Some things perhaps. And I also think it's important that we let things go another week or so and see how it goes. But there are some bigger concerns that I think need to be addressed. Sydney?
Thank you. Yeah, those are two great ones. You're right that I think probably a letter to the minister with a speedy reply, I think is important. But you also raised a good point about, some things we don't want them left so that they are taken care of quick, and some things are working themselves out just because of logistics. So one of them I heard was about that, many of us have probably heard about the drop off and pick up, and when is it that they're supposed to access their kids or wait for a bus, and the first few days were in some schools were a little chaotic and took a long time for that to happen, but I've now heard that that's running smooth just a couple of days later too. So I think a letter to the minister with those first two issues are good, and maybe we just add to it right here.
So I've got, James, I know you wanted to ask a question. I've got a very long list of things. I don't know, do we want to, you're next, James, but in doing that, do we want to talk about all of those things now, or let's come back to that. James?
Yeah, so as Sydney was alluding to, like the water fill stations and things like that, those would obviously be in-house operational issues that the administration would be responsible for making sure that they have them in place now. I did overhear Minister Trivers and Minister Jameson speaking about that today, and they're working together to ensure that we get more of the portable water filling stations into the schools. So what I would like to propose is that any committee members that have heard concerns or kinks issue, say, Madam Chair, maybe we filter them in through you, and then a draft letter be prepared, including the issues that you've been hearing, and we send it to the minister.
Does that work for everyone?
I just don't think it's the responsibility of this committee to be trying to solve all the operational issues within the school.
Yep, no, I absolutely agree, and I think that it's also important that we do use this mechanism we have to get answers to those questions.
Yeah, definitely.
So I do appreciate about that, because I know we don't have, we're not going to spend our time going through each one, so so that Does everyone agree with that? Okay, excellent. I was gonna say something else, and now I forget. So we'll let things kind of happen organically and see who gets back to us, and they may bring more concerns to us that we haven't considered. Because there's a whole lot going on. All right, so we are ready to move on to our other.
There's a whole lot
Committee.
of really good things going on too.
Oh,
I just wanna
absolutely.
make
When
sure
I
that-
say a whole, yeah, and I think, I mean, we should probably just take a second to talk about that, because I think just the simple fact that our kids were allowed to go back to school and be with their friends, I see a huge, my kids are so much happier now than they were, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Change in attitudes and everything. So I think, during the pandemic, we talked about why do we need to reopen schools? And absolutely for the mental health of our kids, and in some cases, safety of our kids. So I know there was, just like when the daycares reopened, there was a lot of fear around what that would look like, and there was a lot of hesitancy, and people's anxiety was turning into fear and kind of a lot of questions. And so I think letting it work out. So you're absolutely right, James. There's a lot of great things happening, and I'd love to see them continue like that.
Yeah.
So to get the kinks worked out would be,
I guess too, Chair, it's like many other issues that we've had to face, and thankfully with the leadership of Dr. Heather Morrison and her incredible team leading us through all this. Another example is people were losing their mind when the seasonal residents were allowed back into PEI to their cottages. It's worked extremely well. People lost their mind when they found out that the soccer was coming to PEI. It's gone incredible, So there are lots of really, really good things happening, and we're going to continue to see issues arise where we want to try to get back to some kind of normalcy. But I think at the same time we have to trust the people that are leading this, that they are guiding us through and making the right decisions. So it's just, I get a sense sometimes that every time we try to move forward with some type of reopening, that there's just those voices out there that are just like trying to shut it down. We need to move forward. We need to make things happen.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. And I absolutely think that we are going to go through different stages, and people are going to have different experiences to that stage. But I would caution around using language like people losing their mind when they express fear or concern about legitimate things. I would be very concerned about the tone of our committee being such that it discourages people from bringing forward legitimate fears. I think that the school reopening is going really well, and I think we have a lot to be thankful for in that. But I also think that the parents who are expressing concern have legitimate concerns, and I do think that these things are solvable. But I would just ask that we be careful on how we talk about people.
Thank you. All right, so moving on to our other committee topic. So there's quite a list of things we have here, and it is quite education heavy, and I mean, rightly so. We have been for now with the reopening of schools, and I also think it's important that we look at the economy side of things. So I have something that I would love to add in terms of the economy. I'm wondering the best way, if we go through these and kind of consider them, these are meetings that were booked and then canceled, or like I said, or we're in the midst of being booked. Do you want me to read through quickly that list? So we have elections PEI. They were going to come in and talk about elected school boards. PEI Home and School were also going to come in and talk about elected school boards. Skills PEI was coming in to talk about the skilled labor shortage. And then we had other topics such as social promotion, rural internet access, kindergarten curriculum review and universal pre-kindergarten program, Parks funding, Post-Secondary Institution Sexual Violence Policies Act regulations, which we did get an update on. Chef John Pritchard for the school food program. And then last, the letter that I think will warrant a whole discussion on its own around decolonizing Charlottetown tourism. It was the letter that we received from a group of artists. So priorities have shifted a little bit in the midst of the pandemic. So I'm wondering, out of those things, and then I don't know, did everyone get a copy of this? Yeah, okay. So these were all of the different priorities that we had identified at the time. There's quite a lengthy list of them. And so I guess that to go through it right now and prioritize is a lot. So if we want to talk about the ones that I've mentioned, and they're highlighted in blue. Do you have that too? So the ones that are highlighted in blue are the ones that I just shared. So why don't we start with the blue ones and see, are they still kind of course a priority, but are they still kind of top of mind for us right now? Or if we would like to push those farther down the list, and then have a discussion around the letter that we received. So if we look at the school food program, breakfast program, did I mention that one? Oh yeah. What do you think? Anybody have any thoughts on, if you look through those priorities? Like, for example, I think the rural internet access is top of mind for me for both the economy and education. So I think that I would suggest that would be kept as a priority for us.
I would move it to the top.
To the top? Yeah.
Yeah, I would go with the rural internet one as one of the higher ones too.
Okay. Do we want to go through these one by one and kind of talk about them? Lynn, did you have something?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what James was saying earlier about the need to focus on economic development and economic recovery. I think skilled labor shortage fits nicely into that. We've certainly heard lots in the construction industry in the last little while. So I would list that as another one of our previous priorities that I think still needs to maintain.
Robert?
I would suggest that we're all kind of, maybe we all just kind of pick our top three, and I think there's some of the same. Skilled labor shortage would be mine, and the rural internet, and parks funding. Parks, which is kind of an economic development one too, and then there's this information request for a suggestion to examine the future of provincial parks. So those would be my three.
Okay.
And if there's commonalities there, you got there. That's the start of it. I think we try to do them all. We're just going to be here forever.
Yeah, and so does everyone agree on those two then, at least the skilled labor shortage and the rural internet access? Yes. Do you agree on those? Okay. And then what does everyone think is a third? Any thoughts on that? I think parks makes sense too.
I'd like the third one down, the process of reestablishing elected school boards. I know we heard from education, but see here elections PEI was canceled, and then PEI Home School Federation was canceled as well. I think it'd be good to get their input. Mm-hmm. It's a topic that's been talked about on and off for years, and how we get people engaged.
Yeah.
We're lucky to have people like Heather Mullen out there that does tremendous work.
Sydney?
Yeah, I would move to make the home and school the third priority, and by the time we get them in, perhaps the home and school associations will have some good feedback about how the first month went in school, and we can hear from them as well. And then setting up the witnesses that we want for internet and for the skilled labor.
Okay. Lynn?
And thank you, Chair. I agree with that, and I would just add to it. It looks like Tim Garrity of Elections PEI wanted to present on the role, responsibility, and challenges faced in regards to running for elected school board elections. So perhaps that would dovetail in neatly, if possible, same day or around the same time.
Would that be something that would be possible?
I think so.
Okay.
from the sounds of things, I've heard members saying that we're prioritizing skilled labor, we're prioritizing rural internet, we're prioritizing the elected school boards, and in the case of the elected school boards, as a couple of folks have pointed out, that covers some of the meetings that we had to cancel before, which is a good thing. Also, too, elections PEI was just mentioned, falls under that same category. So what I'm hearing up to this point, skilled labor, the rural internet, and the elected school boards are the next things we'd be looking at just in terms of priority items after reopening. Is that what I'm hearing from the committee?
Robert?
Just to add a little more to the skilled labor shortage, I would say we need to investigate a labor shortage, period. Like, it's not, sometimes it's unskilled labor that many employers are having a hard time to deal with, but, you know, I'm not saying that there isn't still certain skill sets that there's a shortage of as well, but I think in general terms, from my experience as a former employment counselor and an MLA for as long as I have seen quite a dramatic shift from, you know, well, obviously our employment rates have gone up, or non-employment rates have gone down. That's, you know, it's a cycle that's going on here, but and how does that handle from a post-pandemic? Because I think at the last committee meeting I was at, we were talking about people not being able to make ends meet, but yet we got all these jobs that are empty or you know, vacant and stuff. So is there a way that we can kind of correlate a transition from CERB and the pandemic stuff into fulfilling some of these gaps to allow the economy then to grow? So I guess it's a bigger question and a bigger picture, but I just wanted to emphasize maybe it's more than just skilled labor that's our challenge. So, and maybe that's what everybody was thinking too, but I just wanted to express it, I guess.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I wonder, in saying that, we had the three different groups we had kind of pinpointed to come in. We already heard from the Construction Association and from Holland College. So Skills PEI was canceled. Is there, in that, Robert, is there anyone that you would identify?
Well, like I say, and I know when you get the Construction Association, you're gonna get a specific industry in it, the shortage as it goes to that. But we have a labour market development agreement here with the federal government through Service Canada. And I might suggest that, you know, some of the potential experts regarding where they see the labour market going, and how do we try to fill some of those gaps. So whether that's Skills PEI, or whether it's somebody in Service Canada to try to frame that for Prince Edward Island specific. There may be some interesting experts that we could bring in to enlighten us a little bit more of where they see the trend lines going. Once again, as a former employment counselor, I do, you know, they do keep a lot of statistics from the it's called the NOC codes. I forget what occupational C is code, but anyway. So there's a number of experts that are out there within the system, so we should be able to find out who they might be and get some sense of where PEI is going, or where they see the trends in labour demands are going to be moving forward, and how we fill those gaps.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Anybody else have any suggestions, Lynn?
It's separate from this. I agree with what Robbie is saying. I totally agree with this conversation. And I think another aspect of the economic recovery that is not talked about often enough is how disproportionately it's been impacting women. Even the most recent numbers on women's economic recovery points to the fact that a lot of women still haven't returned to work. I wonder if there would be some advantage in bringing in someone to talk to us about what is being done specifically to address that for women.
Yeah, does everyone agree with that too? Because I'm wondering, we could probably put it into that meeting topic, right?
If we're talking about economic recovery.
Yeah.
Whether it's skilled labor shortage,
Well,
it's different.
yeah.
I don't think the problem there is
Yeah,
an absence of skill.
Yeah,
But
Good
probably an absence of support behind the scenes in some capacity, and I think it would be interesting to either hear from the minister responsible for the status of women on what specifically we're doing to ensure a gender lens is being used in our economic recovery plan, or the minister from economic growth and tourism to hear from his department on what initiatives they're taking to first find out where these gaps exist and then how we're filling them. But I certainly have loads of questions on that.
what does everybody think of that?
Yeah.
Getting that?
That's a very timely topic.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Ministry of Economic Development expressed shock whenever those questions were asked in the legislature, and I sound like committed to working towards to make it better, so absolutely, it's got an update.
Excellent. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Yes, Sean?
Just a little bit of clarity on that. The last few minutes, we've discussed not only the skilled labor shortage, but MLA Henderson mentioned sort of a more general labor shortage as well, wanting to speak to someone regarding that. MLA Lund had mentioned a focus on how the economic troubles recently have affected women in particular. We've mentioned a few different folks that we might have in to speak about this, but I'd like to nail down who we might actually be inviting. Service Canada was mentioned, status of women was mentioned, the Minister of Economic Growth and Tourism mentioned. Are those all folks that we'd be sending general invitations on this broad topic to?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that a motion before the committee then?
Does everyone agree to
Yeah.
that?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we've identified our, labor shortage, economic recovery as it pertains to women, elected school boards, rural internet access. Are those kind of where we see our priorities for the next little bit? Robert?
Our priorities would have been the rural internet is number one, number two was the skills issue, and number three was the school board elections. That's
Yep.
so I wouldn't necessarily put them in that order, but that's what I was sort of hearing as a group there.
Yep, that's what I heard as well.
Actually, I
And
would agree with that order.
Yeah. Okay.
Although,
Yeah.
your number one and number two
Yeah.
can be interchanged
No,
so
I-
easily, right?
yeah, absolutely. Okay. Lynn?
Chair. I would also say that there are a number of other pieces of the economy that I think we need to be talking about. I don't want to make our work plan unreasonably long, so I'm wondering if we would rather add to our work plan as we go along, or if we would like to identify, like small businesses, for example, there's a lot of information coming out that will suggest that a great percentage of small businesses are not going to make it through the next 12 months. I wonder if we need to be having some discussions with the business community on where they're seeing their biggest concerns at the moment. I think tourism is another part of the economy that has been enormously impacted that we haven't been discussing yet. Do we want to add to our work plan to that degree at this point, committee, or do you want to just work through what we have so far? I will look for your input.
Sydney?
I would suggest that we add to it now. I think it's a good exercise. As time goes on, you realize priorities shift, but they're good to have on the paper, and quite frankly, those are the types of priorities that I think are more important than some of the things that are on this list now. So I would suggest the committee add at will, and we just keep reassessing every time we get through 2 or 3 priorities.
On that, is it okay just to add that, and maybe what our homework could be to consider who it might be that we would like to hear from in terms of Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Even the Tourism Industry Association, PEI, could probably speak to us quite eloquently about what they foresee their challenges in the next little while, as far as that goes. And I can think of a lot of examples on who could speak to us from the business community, whether we ask the Chambers of Commerce to present to us, or I'm open to other suggestions.
Restaurant Association,
Oh, that's-
because that's a very, very vulnerable sector right now.
Totally agree with you.
Okay.
Open to other ideas.
Chair,
Robert?
I'll suggest on the economy side, one in my area, like some of the, I'll put them as non-profit organizations, although not necessarily that. If I use an example, the O'Leary and Ellerslie Legion, really having a hard time. Now, they provide a business, they, serve banquets, they
Or
serve
an employer.
an employer, whatnot. My conversations with them, they're really getting hammered. And the rules are pretty restrictive, and they really can't get much going. So I don't know how that all equates into it. Sort of a bit like the restaurant association, because some of them do serve food, and some of them, serve alcohol. Some of them do banquets. Some of them play bingo. all of those are revenue streams that they're all getting hit by. And I'll even go into places like museums, like with the Canadian Potato Museum's another one I've been watching pretty closely. Non-profit organizations, a lot of their wages are paid through different programs, but they have certain costs to operate, just electricity, lights, snow removals, all those different things that they have to do. They're just not getting the people coming through the doors at all. And I'll say some of them may survive, but boy, how long does this last? If we're into this for another year, that we don't see much of tourism numbers coming, they won't survive. And so what do governments and what do our communities and societies do without them, or how do we keep them? So I don't know, you add that into the mix, I guess.
Yeah, good questions. Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I completely agree with what you're saying, Robbie. I think the community sector network could be a really valuable group to bring in because they represent all kinds of nonprofits and NGOs and organizations that have mandates like you're describing.
So I'll mention just the equation in that. So PEI Legion Command would be an example to represent all the legions. You also have the Museum and Heritage Foundation or the PEI Museums Association. So those would be potential representatives of groups that may be able to represent all of those areas. Because I say, I know Larry might be impacted, Morel may not be at all. I don't know. But I mean, every community would have a little bit of a different twist. I think there's overreaching issues that would be for all. But those are just two suggestions on those. I'm sure Lions Clubs, all those kind of service sector organizations that might have assets, they would be challenged.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else want to add anything to that? Okay. Sean, how does that look? Is there anything that you're left wondering?
Not particularly. From the sounds of things, there's some leeway on the part of the committee as to sending invitations, making plans for things other than the top priority items, not just that. And I know the work we've done with committees before. The health committee is one of the busiest we've had recently. And when I was clerking that, it would set priorities. There were topics that they always wanted to be their 1, their 2, their 3. But in practice, what you do is shaped somewhat by who's available as well. Sometimes people from topics 7, 8, and 9 happen to be available and eager before people connected with topics 1, 2, and 3 were. So we did identify the 3 topics earlier that are sort of the leading ones. One thing I would seek some clarity on is just that it's okay, basically the committee is all right with scheduling things other than those top 3 if they're what comes our way first. If we have respondents who are good to go earlier than the priority topics are.
Is everybody okay with that? Just kind of as people are available? Yeah, okay.
Another question I'd ask just in relation to that, any of the older topics that are in the work plan that we haven't specifically mentioned as following up on just now, the committee's fine to sort of leave those for the moment. We wouldn't be refreshing invitations or taking new action on those files right now.
Thoughts?
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is everybody all right with that for now?
There's, on page 2, item number 3, not highlighted, but we talked about the labor market and skilled labor and things like that. I think career awareness, how students are made aware of options at junior and high school levels. I think that really actually ties in with the whole issue. So I don't know how or who we would have come in to talk about that, but.
It's a really good point, James. Robert?
You're more with school guidance. Is there a group that sort of represents that group? Career counselors or in the school system?
There is a career program. I think it's quite outdated. It might be interesting to have someone from the department, perhaps in charge of that curriculum, as well as someone that represents the counselors, because I know that there is an element of career counseling in high school. So it might be worth, I'd have to have a think on who, unless someone can think off the top of their head, I'd have to have a think on, I'm not sure exactly who those people are, but I could definitely bring that back to our next meeting and see if everybody would agree on that, if that's okay with everyone. Okay. Anything else on that? We also had the request from the Health and Social Development Committee to add to our list the letter that was received from a group of artists and activists on decolonizing Charlottetown tourism. And I don't know if you had a chance to read over their letter. They're just talking about how, with the tourism season kind of ground to a halt this year, we have an opportunity to step back and think about the ways that we do tourism and culture, and how our narratives exclude Black, Indigenous, people of color from the story. I know with this is certainly a very timely letter. I know this was written a little while ago, but nonetheless, it's very relevant, and we do have quite a list of priorities at the moment. Does anyone have anything they would, James?
Yeah, and I read it, and I agree with their concerns, but I guess my hesitation on it would be when we're speaking specifically about Charlottetown tourism versus island-wide tourism. Charlottetown has their own initiatives. They do partner with the province, obviously, but I'd be cautious that we're sticking our oar into Charlottetown's.
Yeah. And so I guess we can either consider this from more of a provincial lens, or perhaps it's something that we pass on to this. I'm not sure how that works, but if we brought this to, the city knows that this is an issue. I'm just not sure how we would proceed.
I'm wondering if, Chair, if the city was copied on this letter.
That's a great question. Perhaps that's something that we can look into to see, and because it is an island-wide issue, but this letter was specifically addressed by concerned citizens of Charlottetown and PEI. This is Lynn.
Thank you, Chair. That's an interesting point, and admittedly one I hadn't considered. I originally felt like it makes a lot of sense to have this group come in. I would be very interested to hear their perspective, and even as I go through this further, I see they're referencing a city council meeting. You're right, we don't have jurisdiction over this particular element. I'm really interested in hearing on the perspectives of people on broadly decolonizing tourism and making sure that the way we promote tourism recognizes Indigenous history, Black history from a provincial standpoint. I don't know if we have any jurisdiction over what the city, I conclusively know we don't have any jurisdiction over what the city of Charlottetown does.
James?
Sorry. And it is sort of a overlapping, right? Because we do have a tourism department that looks after tourism for the entire island. But I look at my community of Stratford, little known fact to most people, but there is a statue on the waterfront of Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas lived at the foot of the bridge, and he was a marathon runner. He was a Black man, and he was, in his day, he was the fastest runner in the Maritimes, or in Atlantic Canada actually, and the town chose to celebrate his achievements and erected the statue. Now, the location, unfortunately, where they placed the statue, present day up until now, isn't ideal because it's by the lagoons, a good friend of mine who was a counselor on the cultural committee at the time, Sandy McMillan, had advocated to have the statue temporarily placed in front of the town hall until our lagoon issue was resolved and it was decommissioned. We're close to that now, but again, that's there. It's nobody knows about it. Stratford has celebrated. We had a famous author come in as well to do some talks in Stratford around black culture here on PI, and it was very successful. So I think we do need to celebrate more of that. But again, I'm just nervous about jumping into Charlottetown's jurisdiction.
Sydney?
Thank you, Chair. We are getting in Taipai to discuss the future of tourism and related to what's been going on with the economy for the last little while. We didn't talk about bringing in the tourism minister at the same time, did we? I don't believe.
That wasn't, it is on our list, but, oh, no, not for that.
I wonder, in light of, okay, what are we going to do for small business and in tourism? We also put it through the lens of BIPOC. And the reason I say that, I've been very lucky and privileged to be working with Edgewood First Nations on a number of projects on Indigenous tourism, and I would love to be able to push the department on what are we doing provincially for Indigenous tourism as part of this, and I see a whole a fuller discussion coming from this letter too. So I wonder if we could respond back, because I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe that this is an organized group. It's just concerned citizens, right? If we responded to Gord, who sent this, or to relate to this group, to say that we are forwarding your letter on to the city of Charlottetown if it hasn't been already. But what we want to do is bring up this topic to the Tourism Association of PEI and to the Minister of Tourism to see what we're doing. As they say, with our tourism season ground to a halt, we have an opportunity to step back and relook at things. So going forward, what is part of our strategy for Black, Indigenous people of color? And when we invite the Taipai in, and I would suggest also bringing in the representatives of the department as well, we say in advance that this is also what we would like to ask, what lens are you looking for something like that?
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with that, and I also have no objection to asking this group if they would like to present on the island's tourism strategy. If they would like to speak to us more broadly, I have no objection to hearing from what they would like to say to us. I think it's great to speak to tourism, but they're also only looking at it from their own lens and not from the lens of other cultures. So I think it would be useful to hear from people specifically who are asking, but keeping in mind that I agree with James, we don't need to hear on Charlottetown maybe specifically, as they are responsible for governing themselves, but I would be open to hearing their views on reimagining island tourism from that perspective.
Okay. Does everyone agree with that? Kind of get it tied into kind of some of the presentations that we already have, because it is kind of a bigger, broader, can fit into a broader picture with a very specific lens. Okay. Any other comments or questions on that? Okay.
Since we're discussing bringing in the minister and Taipai, if I understood correctly, what we'd be looking at there is we'd be asking them about this decolonizing topic, but we'd also be asking them about the state of the tourism industry and plans for it more broadly. Yes, that's what the committee would be asking them for.
Is it Lynn?
Those feel like two remarkably separate presentations. I don't know if we would fit that all into one presentation. We'll be asking for the state of tourism and the challenges you face, and also your plan to decolonize tourism. Feels
Big.
that feels big. Broad. You know, I feel like those.
Alternatively, then we could send two separate invitations, or one invitation that advises them this would be treated as two separate occasions or two separate meetings.
What do you think?
What is customary in the case where you want to speak to a group about two really separate topics?
James?
Chair, might I suggest that the issue that we were talking about was the potential failure of many small businesses, whether they be retail or tourism related. I think this is kind of the stream we were going on with getting the minister in to see what kind of supports and plans to ensure their viability moving forward. With regards to the letter, again, checking to see that the city of Charlottetown received this communication as well, but rather than possibly having the minister in a second time to speak on a completely separate topic, would it be advantageous for time to copy this letter to the minister and ask his department for a written presentation or update on their thoughts or plans moving forward?
Does anyone have any thoughts on that proposal? Do we think that sounds like what we would like to do, or would
Former
we?
Minister of Tourism, what would 2-5 say?
Yeah, there are different subjects as far as that goes, so I'd maybe just on the issue of one of my thoughts as you're dealing with the decolonization of tourism promotion, and if we look at it from a bigger PEI perspective, we have lots of Indigenous tourism operations across the island, just not Charlottetown. So I mean, where do you draw the line in this stuff as far as who's right or who's wrong?
There's a major one being constructed on the waterfront
Yeah,
right now that
exactly.
will be a great addition to Charlottetown.
I also think that this points to a much bigger systemic issue. So I'm curious if we would like to have someone come in and talk to us about this, or if we want to send a letter. We have a big agenda, and so I would hate to let anything fall off. I wonder what we think about perhaps sending a letter for now with the intent of perhaps having someone come in to revisit it. I don't want to leave it.
No.
And I don't, I want to make sure that we get through these priorities. So would everyone agree that perhaps for now we send a letter on the decolonization of tourism to kind of get the department, I'm sure they're thinking about it now. It's been, it's a very timely issue. So if we send a letter for now with the intent on having them in at some point, would that be okay with everyone? Yeah. Robert?
Come easy.
Sean?
When you say send a letter for now, is that a letter bringing this topic to their attention? Is it a letter requesting a written submission? What specifically would we want, if anything, by way of response from them?
I wasn't, Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I would suggest we're looking for a written submission.
Yeah, that's kind of what whenever I was speaking, that's what I had in my head. Sometimes it stays up there and it doesn't come out. I just assume people know what I'm talking about.
And I do.
Yeah, okay.
So a written submission then?
Yeah. Okay, great. Does anyone have anything else to say on topics in the work plan? I think we've got a hefty little agenda there. Okay, so we had moved on to the correspondence. And so is there anything else that anyone had that they wanted to discuss? All right. So can I get, it feels like that was a really quick meeting, a motion to adjourn? Robert? All right. Meeting adjourned.